Hello, my name is Brian Jackson, and this is going to be chapter 6 of my novel. It's the chapter's entitled Sound and Fury, and it's probably going to be the last presentation I do with the novel for a while. If you want to know what happens after this chapter, the book will be on sale very soon, and you'll be able to learn what happens to the characters after chapter 6 in the novel. I can assure you that there is quite a bit more to the story than what you'll hear here. But I thought this would be a good breaking point. So, without any further discussion, here we go. Charlie snapped awake, soaked in sweat, trembling, heart racing in her chest. She was petrified and unsure of why. She felt as if she had awakened from a terrible nightmare, but she did not remember dreaming. The room had filled with oppressive heat. The power stirred within the back of her mind. By instinct, Charlie slammed it down. "Go away!" A slim dagger dug into her skull for a moment before the power quieted down and was silent. Charlie sat up and reached for the clock. 6:30. She had an hour before it was time to get up, but she was too frightened to sleep. Charlie struggled out of bed and walked out into the hallway. Something was wrong, but she didn't know what. The apartment was dark and quiet. Daddy was still asleep. For a moment she considered waking him, but then decided against it. I probably just had a nightmare and I don't remember it. Charlie walked down the hallway and went into the bathroom. She showered and dressed, then went into the living room to wait for Daddy to get up. Charlie sat down on the couch, turned on the television. Popeye came on. Zombie-like, she stared at the screen without comprehending, the television being little more than a source of light and noise. What's going on? The question repeated over and over again in her mind. Something was very wrong, but she was too frightened to sense what, so she just sat and stared. An hour later, after she got up, Daddy strode into the living room. Charlie looked at him and smiled. "Good morning, Daddy." "Good morning, Charlie. Why are you awake?" "I couldn't sleep." Charlie wanted to tell her father what she was feeling, to warn him of the danger she sensed, but she remained silent. She wasn't even sure what it was she had felt. Did you have a nightmare?" "No," Charlie lied. "I just couldn't sleep." Her voice came out slightly confused. "Okay." Daddy's voice was his usual level and calm tone, but she sensed slight concern. "How about pancakes for breakfast?" Charlie smiled. "Yeah!" I'll need some help." "Okay, Daddy." Charlie followed Daddy into the kitchen, her sense of danger forgotten. As she helped her father make and eat breakfast, Charlie felt nothing but happiness. She was able to forget, if only for a little while, all of the misery that had been inflicted upon her. For that hour and a half, she was an ordinary little girl spending time with her daddy. After breakfast, Charlie went into the bathroom to brush her teeth. As she was putting toothpaste on her toothbrush, the sense of danger returned. It was stronger now and more urgent. Her toothbrush dropped out of her hand onto the floor, narrowly missing the toilet bowl. The sound of it striking the floor was deafening. Now she understood. The men from the government had found them again. It had been over 2 years since they arrived in Manhattan, long enough for Charlie and Daddy to begin to believe that they could be safe. Daddy found work as day security for a construction company, while Charlie went back to school. Charlie made friends again. In the spring, Charlie's 7th birthday came, and Daddy took her to the Statue of Liberty, while in the summer they took day trips to the beaches of Long Island. Then fall came, and to Charlie's surprise, Daddy let her dress up as Ariel from The Little Mermaid and go out trick-or-treating. By Christmas time, they had almost forgotten they were on the run. Winter gave way to spring, and Charlie's 8th birthday came. This time, Daddy allowed Charlie to invite a few friends over and throw a small party. Life had almost returned to normal. That had been 6 months ago. Now Charlie felt less certain. Charlie was terrified. She wanted to run to her father and tell him what she felt, but she could not. Her feet were rooted to the floor. She could only stand and stare at herself in the mirror. Her face was very pale, and she was trembling. Her heart was racing. She imagined she could hear its pounding. After a moment, her fear receded enough to allow coherent thought. She was shuddering hard and could not stop. "They're coming. They're coming for us." As she thought that, she absently bent down and picked up her toothbrush. It was clean, save for a single blonde hair that had stuck to the toothpaste. After several minutes of trembling and fear, she realized that it was hers. Charlie picked the hair out of the toothpaste and half-heartedly brushed her teeth. When she was finished, she returned to the kitchen to wait for Daddy. He appeared 5 minutes later, and the two of them left the apartment and got on the subway. 30 minutes after leaving the apartment with Daddy, Charlie was sitting in Miss Peters' class. A social studies textbook was open in front of her. Miss Peters was reading from chapter 2. Charlie was barely aware of what was in the chapter, something about people living in cities and towns. She wasn't sure. Her mind was preoccupied with fear. She had not told her father of the danger she sensed, and now the feeling was growing stronger. The men from the government had found them again. They were coming for Daddy and her. Charlie tried to force herself to think rationally. She tried to devise some sort of escape plan should the government men appear through the classroom door, but she could not think of anything. Time dragged by. As the morning passed, Charlie grew more frightened and wary. Every time she heard footsteps outside the classroom, she would tense and look up expecting to see the blank-faced government men in their black suits appear through the door, but each time the footsteps would pass without slowing. At 8 o'clock, they finished with social studies and started math. Charlie was usually very good at math, but today she missed 6 problems. Miss Peters gave her a disapproving look to go with the sad face she drew on the paper. Then she said that she wanted to talk to Charlie later. Charlie hoped that she would be there later. After math came spelling. They had a quiz today. Just as Miss Peters was handing out paper, Charlie heard the faint but unmistakable sounds of footsteps in the hallway. As they grew closer, she realized that it was not just one person, but 2. Her heart began to race. "Oh, please don't come in here. Please, don't be here for me." The footsteps grew louder and closer. They were slowing now. A moment later, Miss Peters was putting a piece of white-lined paper in front of her. Miss Peters was putting a piece of white-lined paper in front of her, there was a knock at the door. Charlie's heart flash froze. "Please, no." Miss Peters crossed the room, slipped the door open, and stepped outside. From where she sat, Charlie could not see who was there. Fear clouded her mind such that she felt nothing about the person outside. Miss Peters and this unknown person spoke for a few minutes in hushed voices. Then Miss Peters turned towards Charlie. "Sally, your dad's here to pick you up." Charlie went weak with relief. "Okay, Miss Peters." She stood up on rubbery legs and crossed the classroom to where her father stood waiting for her. As soon as she saw him, she knew something was wrong. His eyes had that focused look of cold anger that always appeared when he sensed a threat to Charlie. "Daddy?" "Shh, don't say anything yet." Daddy whispered to her in a soft, implacable tone. Miss Peters bent down and gave her a sympathetic look. "Now you be a good girl, Sally." She gave Daddy a momentary glance and then turned and went back to teaching the class. Before Charlie could say a word, Daddy took her hand and led her out of the classroom. They walked down the hallway in silence for a few moments before Daddy made a sudden turn and led her into an empty classroom. He closed the door behind them and then bent down to her level. "I need you to listen very carefully." His voice was low and intense. "We have to run again, Charlie. The men from the government have found us." "I know," Charlie whispered fearfully. "Then you know they know who we are, and they've probably already given our new names to the police. Give me your ID card." Charlie reached under her shirt, pulled the lanyard that held her ID card over her head, and placed it in her father's hand. He took her ID card from its protective plastic case and snapped it in half. Then he slipped in another. This one had the same photograph of her, but identified her as Karen Harrington. Daddy held the card up to show her. "If anyone asks you, your name is Karen Harrington. Mine is Lewis Harrington. Say it back to me." "My name is Karen Harrington," Charlie recited. "My daddy's name is Lewis Harrington." He flashed a brief smile. "Good girl." Then he took her hand again. "There's a cab waiting for us outside. The driver's going to ask to see your ID before he lets us get in. I want you to give it to him and let him scan your thumbprint and retinas. Answer any questions he asks, but don't talk to him, and don't tell him any more than he asked. Do you understand?" Charlie nodded. "Good." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Come on, we need to get going." Without a word, Charlie followed him through the hallway and out of PS 81 for the last time. The taxi was waiting for them outside, just as Daddy had said. Charlie gave the man the ID card her father had given her, and then let him scan her right thumb and eyes. When he was finished, the man smiled and told her she could get in. Charlie sat down, and Daddy climbed in beside her. "Grand Central, quickly." "Okay, buddy." The driver pulled onto the street and slammed the pedal to the floor. As they sped away, Charlie glanced back and saw two men getting out of a black car that had stopped in front of her school. Charlie knew immediately that they were from the government. A moment later, the two men disappeared inside her school. They had just made it. If they had been in there a few moments longer, then the government men would have caught them. Charlie turned away from the window and hugged her father around the waist. "What is it, Charlie?" His voice was steady, inquisitive. She did not answer. It didn't take long for them to reach Grand Central Station. Soon they were waiting in line to board the subway. Then they were on their way to Coney Island. It was lunchtime when they arrived, and they were both hungry, so they went to TGI Fridays. After lunch, they got back on the subway and headed for Staten Island. This was how they spent the rest of the day, going from subway to subway, traveling all over New York. Charlie sensed the government men close by all day, but somehow they managed to stay ahead, barely. Eventually, they ended up back in Manhattan, and it was there where their luck ran out. As Charlie and her father emerged from the subway to catch the bus, a black car appeared out of nowhere and began following them. Charlie knew immediately that it was the government men. They had been found. Daddy must have felt it too, because he picked up the pace. Charlie had trouble keeping up. They had been walking fast before. Now they were almost running. Her legs were much shorter than her father's, and she was tired. Still, she pushed herself to move as fast as she could. They had to get away. Daddy glanced at her for a moment, and then scooped her up and started running. Charlie glanced over his shoulder and saw that the black car had slowed to match their pace. Its windows were dark, making it impossible to see, but Charlie sensed at least 4 people in the car. Cold terror gripped her heart. It was getting dark. They were heading up a side street in one of the poor neighborhoods. The street was deserted, save for the occasional car or person hurrying home. The government men could take them here. Frantic, she scoured the street and sidewalk for some kind of escape. There was nothing. They were approaching an intersection with another, busier street. Daddy turned right on this street and began pushing his way along the crowded sidewalk. Charlie glanced ahead and saw that there was another intersection a short distance ahead. As she watched, the light turned red. "Oh no, please, don't stay red." They were closing upon the intersection, and the black car was right behind them. Charlie's heart began to race. This was where the men would take them. All at once, Daddy became very focused and tense. His anger, cold as ice, was palpable. "Please, no." The light was still red. A knot of people was building up on the sidewalk in front of the crosswalk. Charlie and her father soon became trapped within this knot. She glanced back again and saw the black car stop. 3 men piled out. They were young and looked considerably fresher than she or her father felt. Charlie screamed, "Daddy, they're coming!" Daddy looked around quickly, and then she felt him suddenly push out with his mind at a limousine approaching the intersection on the cross street. It skidded to a stop almost instantly. Daddy ran to it, then approached the door and almost threw her inside before jumping in himself. Charlie had never ridden in a limousine before, and under other circumstances would have been awed by its plush interior. At that moment, though, she was too frightened to notice or care. All that she could think of was the men who had gotten out of the black car, the men who were no doubt right behind them and would, in another few seconds, throw open the car door and haul the 2 of them out. The window that separated the driver's seat from the passenger compartment rolled down, and the driver turned and gave her father an annoyed look. "Hey, man, this ain't no taxi cab. Take your kid and get the hell out of my limo." Daddy reached into his pocket and produced his gun. "Drive, or I will kill you." Charlie shuddered in fear. "What are you doing?" She couldn't believe that her father was doing this, not Daddy. He was distant, but always kind and gentle with her. How could he ever do something like this? Daddy gave her a mild, reassuring glance before jamming his gun against the man's head. Okay, buddy, whatever you want. Just cool it with that thing. The driver's expression was fearful. He pulled out quickly, just before the government men could reach the car, and sped through the now green light. Daddy relaxed a little, but kept his gun trained on the driver. I do not wish to harm you, but don't think I won't kill you if I have to. Charlie looked up at him with fear in her eyes, as fierce tremors took her. She remained thus for a long time before exhaustion overtook her. She awakened some time later to find the car had stopped, and she was alone inside. Fear cropped up within her. Daddy? She sensed him nearby, but could not understand why they had stopped. She scooted to the door, opened it, and got out. Then suddenly she understood. Her father meant to kill the driver. He had decided this man was a threat and resolved to kill him. Horror exploded within her. Oh, Daddy, no. Please don't. Deep inside, she knew who and what her father was. She had long since sensed the truth. But he was still her father, and she loved him. He was the strongest, bravest, smartest man in the world, and he was always so gentle and loving with her. He was a good father to her. Please, Daddy, don't. She looked around. The driver had parked the limousine in an empty lot between two dilapidated buildings. It was dark here, save for a narrow pool of light from a single street lamp. No one was around. The air felt chilly and deadly still. She detected a faint odor of rotting garbage. Charlie began to walk, not knowing where she was headed. She crossed the empty lot and entered a dark, narrow alley. Two silhouettes stood at the far end. She recognized her father and the driver at once. Get down on your knees. Her father's voice was cold and businesslike. Please, buddy, you don't have to do this. The driver's voice registered panic. She could feel his fear radiating out at her in cold waves. Please. I'm sorry, but I do. I cannot have you going to the police. Daddy's cold indifference shocked her. Please, I won't tell a soul. Bang! She jumped and nearly shrieked with fear at the sharp report of her father's pistol. He had done it. Charlie burst into tears as the reality of his acts sank in. He had murdered that man. Oh, Daddy, how could you? And yet she could not hate him. He was her daddy, and she loved him with all her heart. He turned, and for a moment she thought she sensed sorrow and guilt from him, not for the deed itself, but rather for the fact that she had seen it. Charlie, I'm sorry you saw that. You should have stayed in the car. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist, holding him as tightly as she could. Oh, Daddy, she sobbed. Daddy, Daddy. He hugged her to him. I'm sorry you saw that, he repeated dully. She clutched her father desperately as the tears streamed down her cheeks. Daddy, please say it's not. Please say you didn't. I'm sorry, Charlie. She cried harder. Yes, she had known for a long time. But this somehow made it real. Her daddy was a killer, a professional murderer. The fact that he was indifferent to having ended this man's life made it even worse. Charlie wept for her father because she still loved him, and she knew deep inside that he was lost. Charlie cried and cried in that dark, filthy alley until finally exhaustion overtook her once more, and she passed again into darkness, still clutching her father. When she awoke again, they had reached the Lincoln Tunnel, and her father had gently roused her to have her identity confirmed. Charlie was nervous throughout the procedure. The fake IDs had always worked before, but she still harbored the fear that this time they wouldn't. And what happens if they find that man? She had pushed that thought aside quickly. It hurt too much to think about that. Daddy had explained to her when he got the fake IDs that only one of them would be active at a time, and that once you used a new one, the old one would become invalid, and the new one would become active. Something else troubled her as well. Daddy had gotten 4 fake IDs, and they had already used 3. If the government men found out who they were again, then they wouldn't be able to hide anymore. The new ID card worked as intended, and soon they were on their way. The remainder of the ride to Philadelphia was long and uneventful. Charlie slept the entire time. When she awakened again, it was dark out, and the limousine had stopped. She looked at her father questioningly, still more asleep than awake, and not yet remembering everything that had happened. "Where are we?" "Philadelphia International Airport," Daddy replied. Charlie groaned and sat up, rubbing her eyes. There wasn't a clock in the limousine, and she didn't have a watch, but she knew it was late. Daddy switched off the car and turned to her. "Can you walk for a little while?" "I think so." Her sleep had been restful, and she felt fairly fresh. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "Croatia," he responded, his voice all business. "But first, we're going to catch a flight to London." "Where is Croatia?" She knew that Croatia was a country somewhere, but that was about it. It's in Eastern Europe, near Italy. It's bordered to the north by Hungary and Slovenia, and to the east by Serbia and Bosnia. Croatia is a non-extradition country, and we will be able to blend in there. Charlie was silent for a moment. She understood that she would need to learn a new language, make new friends again. More than likely, she would never return to America. That was all right, but she sensed something else that frightened her. Daddy had some deeper intent that he had buried deep in his thoughts, some darker intent for her future. "Will we be safe there?" He met her eyes with a sober gaze. "I don't know, Charlie. Croatia is far away, and I don't think the NSA will have the same resources available there, but I don't know." Both Charlie and her father got out and hurried away from the limousine. 20 minutes later, they were standing outside of the main terminal building. When she saw her father under the bright overhead lights, Charlie became very frightened. He looked terrible. He had been fine when they were in New York. Now he looked very sick. Daddy's face was as white as a sheet, and his skin was soaked in sweat. He was trembling slightly and swaying on his feet. "Daddy, are you all right?" Her voice was little more than a whisper. "I'm fine, Karen. Let's go inside." Daddy's voice was shaky and pained. He took her hand and led her towards a large glass door. Charlie followed him without a word, still very frightened. It was easy to tell by looking at him that Daddy was in agony. It wouldn't be long before he wouldn't be able to stand up at all. She was going to have to take care of him. Charlie helped her father pull the heavy glass door open, and then held it while he stumbled inside. The government men were nearby. She could feel them. They had to find some place to hide until Daddy got better. He couldn't travel for the way he was now. Charlie scanned the airport terminal. She didn't see anyone who looked like one of the government men, or agents as her father had called them. There was a scattering of people. Mothers with tired, up-too-late kids, teenagers in jeans and T-shirts, or halter tops, or white undershirts and open button-down shirts. It was the middle of October, but still warm enough for summer clothing. There was a policeman standing beside the American Airlines counter, and a fat lady talking on a cell phone by the door. To her right, a group of skaters were hassling an old man and his wife. A tall man in a business suit was talking to a young woman in a white halter top, and behind them, and a little to the left, a young man in a naval officer's uniform was talking on a cell phone. The Navy man was sitting in one of the waiting areas before the security checkpoints. Charlie led her father in that direction, acutely aware of the worried and disapproving glances of the people as they passed. They think he's drunk. When they reached the seats, Daddy flopped down in the nearest chair and closed his eyes. Charlie sat down beside him and gently kissed his cheek. "Poor Daddy." He slowly turned and opened his eyes. They were bright red and swollen. One eye looked bigger than the other. When he spoke, his words were slow and filled with pain. "I need you to do something for me, Karen." As sick as he was, he remembered to use the fake name. "Those agents are still out there. It won't take them long to catch up with us. I need your help." Spent her last $20 on her subway passes. We will need money to buy our airline tickets, and you're the only one who can get it." Charlie looked at him questioningly. She knew what he had in mind, but refused to believe it despite all that she had seen that horrible night. "How could I get money?" "You know." His voice was steady. Charlie shook her head. "No, I can't. It's bad. That's stealing. It's not right to steal." She was already frightened and upset by what her father had done to the limousine driver. Now he was asking her to go against what she knew was right and wrong. "I know," he replied, "but there's no other way. Those agents are still searching for us. Our only hope is if we can get far enough away that they won't not be able to find us." "Do I have to, Daddy?" She was close to tears. The thought of stealing was bad enough, but what was worse was that it was Daddy who was telling her to do it. "Karen, it's our only option. We don't have any money. We don't have anything left to sell. And we can't stay here. Those men will find us." Charlie shook her head, struggling to hold back the tears. "It's not right. Please don't make me. It's not right to steal." "I know," he repeated. "And we will need money to escape. I explained this to you, Charlie. Or at least I tried, remember? About doing what you have to survive?" He nodded. "That's right. But Daddy, I don't want to." "Karen, I cannot do any more, and we need the money." His voice was heavy with pain. Charlie looked at him and felt terrible. He was in great pain. She didn't need psychic senses to tell her that. She could see it on his face. She was terrified, and that made it difficult to think clearly. Daddy would soon be too sick to stand up, and they had to get away. The bad men from the government were coming. Charlie looked at her father with great compassion. "Does your head really hurt?" "Yes." His voice was afflicted with suffering. "Okay. I'll try." On impulse, she leaned forward, hugged her father tightly, and kissed him on his forehead. Then she stood up and walked away. Charlie walked quickly and with purpose. She was in one of the few places where a little girl could go unremarked after midnight. If she had been crying, then one of the sky caps or the airport police might have approached her and asked her if she knew what flight her mommy and daddy were on. But she wasn't crying, and she looked like she knew where she was going. Charlie didn't, but she definitely knew what she was looking for. As she continued down the concourse, Charlie studied her surroundings. She saw dozens of people. Some of them were the same people she had noted earlier. Others were people who had trickled in since then. She passed a group of teenagers in jeans with leather jackets and wild hairdos. Later, she passed a fat black woman with a gaggle of kids around Charlie's age. One of them was whining about that he wanted a soda. Not too far away from her was another woman dressed in a peach business suit. She was sitting by one of the front windows typing away on a laptop. Beside her, a tan-skinned man in a black business suit was talking into a cell phone in a soft voice. Charlie eyed him suspiciously for several minutes, but she had no feeling that he was one of the government men. The man was talking to his girlfriend. His voice was high-pitched and carried a tone of false remorse. Charlie had a strong feeling that he was trying to trick the woman on the other end. Probably cheated on her. I'd never let a boy do that to me. There was something suspicious about this man, but she was sure he wasn't from the government. Charlie gave him one last distrustful glance before turning away and continuing along the concourse. Further along, she saw a bunch of vending machines. She could get some money from there, but it wouldn't be that much. Charlie passed them by and continued walking. She passed a garbage can with a plastic Walmart bag sticking out of it. Charlie took the plastic bag and continued walking. A little further along, she saw what she was looking for. Ahead and to the left was a small glass cubicle with a blue ATM sign above it. Charlie's heart quickened. She looked around rapidly. The man in the Navy uniform she saw earlier was standing at the bar across from the ATM cubicle, drinking a beer. To the right of the machine, a slender woman in a white dress was talking on a cell phone, and to her right, another man was sneaking a cigarette in a little alcove that led to the men's and ladies' room. Nobody was paying attention to her. Charlie drew in a slow, steadying breath and casually walked over to the ATM cubicle. At the door, she stopped again, looked around, and then nervously entered. Charlie looked up at the ATM machine inside and became afraid, because her father had told her again and again that she mustn't do it. She had the power like her father, only her power was much stronger, and she never got sick from using it. But sometimes, afterward, there would be fires. She couldn't always control the power, and that was why she wasn't supposed to use it. Sometimes it would get away from her, like the time she had almost burned the house down. My mommy and daddy have to wear bandages because of me, because I was bad. The image of the massive fire that she had started in the living room burned in her mind. It was all my fault. What if something like that happened now? The other reason she wasn't supposed to use the power was because the government man might see her. I don't know who these people are or how much they know about you, but I don't want them to find out anything more than they already know. Your power is different than mine. You don't get sick from using your power, do you? No? And you can move things and light fires. If these men see strange things happening and connected to you, if they saw her now, she and Daddy would be caught. They had no money and nowhere to go. And this was stealing, and that was bad too. What does it matter? They stole Mommy's life, and we need the money. Charlie approached the ATM machine slowly and placed her hand on the little door marked cash. She glanced around once more to see if anyone was being nosy. Nobody was. Charlie turned and reached into the machine with her mind. She found the cash release catch quickly and shoved at it. Charlie smiled as she did it. No, there was no pain involved. It felt good to use the power. And that was another thing that scared her. What if she got to like this dangerous thing? All at once, the cash door opened, and the machine began spitting out money. Charlie hastily positioned the bag underneath the machine, but not before most of the money had flooded to the floor. She quickly bent down and scooped up large handfuls of 10s and 20s from the bottom of the cubicle. When she had picked up all the money, Charlie opened the bag and looked inside. It was stuffed almost to the bursting point with more money than she had ever seen in her life. There must have been over $1 million there. Charlie did not waste time staring. She snapped the shopping bag closed, stood up, and casually walked out of the ATM cubicle. The power was racing in her mind, trying to get out. It was hard for her to hold on to it. Charlie hurried into the ladies' room. There were a number of women inside and only a single open stall. An older woman was headed for it. Charlie rushed past her and slammed the door in her face. After closing the bolt, Charlie turned and pushed the power into the toilet. There was a loud hiss, followed by a sharp crack as the toilet split right down the center from the heat. In an instant, the room was filled with thick steam. Several frightened cries rang out, followed by a number of bewildered voices asking, "What was that? Is everyone okay?" Charlie hurried out of the bathroom in a frightened daze. She knew she had gotten herself in trouble again. Any one of the women in the bathroom could have been a government agent. Even if none of them were, it was certain that one of them would tell an airport cop what they had seen. Sooner or later, it would get back to them. Charlie hurried back to her father, carrying the now heavy shopping bag from the bottom so that it would not rip. Daddy was sitting in the same chair she had left him in. He had closed his eyes, and he looked almost as if he were asleep, except for the pain stamped on his face. Charlie approached him fearfully. She knew she would be in trouble. "Daddy?" As she spoke, she realized for the first time that she was crying. He looked up at her slowly, the pain in his eyes almost immediately replaced by concern. "Charlie, what happened?" "I got the money, like you said." As she spoke, she handed the heavy grocery bag to Daddy. "But when I used the power, I couldn't stop it." She was sobbing hard now. Daddy, I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what, Karen?" "I couldn't stop the power, so I went into the bathroom and put it in the toilet, and the toilet got too hot and it cracked, and everyone in the bathroom heard it." She broke down sobbing. Daddy took her into his arms. "It's all right, Karen. Nobody was hurt. You did the right thing. But they saw me. I let them see me do it. Now those government men will know where we are." She struggled to get the words out between sobs. Daddy stroked her hair. "You've done nothing wrong. They would have found us anyway. This just means we have to move a little faster." He took her hand. "Come on, let's go catch a plane." Charlie glanced up at him incredulously. "You're not mad at me?" "No." He produced a slight smile. "This is good news. You were able to hold on to it long enough to get to the bathroom. Last year you would not have been able to do that. You could have set someone on fire. That would have drawn much more attention." Charlie looked away guiltily as the image of the fire in the living room returned. "Not like I did to you and Mommy in the living room." Daddy squeezed her hand and gently turned her face towards his. "You don't have to think about that anymore, Karen." He lowered his voice. "I know you didn't mean to hurt us." He had reached the ticket counter now. There was no line, so Daddy walked up to the counter. "Hello, I would like 2 tickets to London, please." The young woman behind the counter smiled. "Certainly, sir. I'll need to see your ID first." Daddy took out his wallet and produced his fake ID card. The woman took it, swiped it through a card scanner, and handed it back. "Thank you. Now I'll need to see you to place your thumb on the panel." She glanced at a small glass panel behind her computer monitor. Daddy placed his thumb on the glass panel without a word. "Thank you." The woman reached below the counter and produced a retinal scanner. "Please look into the eyepiece, sir." Daddy did as she asked. A moment later, there was a low beep. The woman smiled again. "Okay, Mr. Harrington, I'm going to need to verify your daughter's identification before I can issue your tickets." "Of course," Daddy replied nonchalantly. He bent down, took her by the shoulders, and whispered in her ear, "Act normal." Then he hoisted her up to the counter. Charlie gave the woman her fake ID card and let the woman scan her thumbprint and retinas. When she got finished, the woman offered Charlie a warm smile. "Thank you. You are a very good girl." Daddy set Charlie down a short distance away, and then returned to the counter. I would like one-way first-class tickets, and I would like priority boarding because of my daughter." The woman nodded and began to type Daddy's order into the computer. "That'll be $3,043.06. Do you accept cash?" "Sure." Daddy reached into the plastic shopping bag and counted out $3,050. The woman made change and then handed Daddy 2 small plastic packets. "These are your tickets. The flight will be approximately 10 hours with a 30-minute stopover in Montreal." Daddy inclined his head. "Thank you. Which gate do we depart from?" "Gate 120. Have a nice flight." Daddy took her hand again. "Come on, Karen. It's time to go." "Okay, Daddy." As she spoke, Charlie suddenly became frightened again. The government men were back. She could feel them someplace in the airport, someplace very close. When they were out of earshot from the ticket counter, Charlie turned to Daddy. "Daddy, I feel those government men around again." Daddy inclined his head again. "Then we should hurry." Charlie didn't think they would be able to get on their plane now, but she said nothing. As Charlie approached the security gate with her father, they stopped short. The gate looked normal, but they both knew better. 2 men in black business suits were standing at the window to the right of the security gate, pretending not to watch the people passing through the gate. A man in a Navy uniform was standing on the other side of the gate, talking to a young woman in a matching blue blazer and suit. They were both government agents. Without warning, Daddy turned and ran for the door, dragging her helplessly behind. Charlie struggled to keep up as her father sprinted across the concourse. Fear pulsed in her blood. The government agents weren't following, but she felt they would soon. It seemed like an eternity before they finally reached the exit. The automatic door opened in slow motion. Charlie and her father bolted through without waiting for it to open fully. Charlie's fear was mounting. "They're going to catch us. They're going to catch us this time." The words repeated over and over in her mind. The government agents were close behind them. It was only a matter of time before they would be caught. Outside, the curb was lined with cars. Taxis, limos, and private cars of all sorts, all sizes jostled for space. A white Chevy Tahoe with black-tinted windows was parked several feet down from where they came out between a taxi and a blue car. The Tahoe's passenger side window was rolled part of the way down. Without a word, Daddy pulled her in that direction. Charlie knew, perhaps even before her father did, what he had in mind. "Daddy, what are you—" "Shh." He offered her a half-smile that was meant to be reassuring. "It's okay, Karen. Everything's going to be fine." They reached the car. Daddy reached through the window and opened the front passenger side door. As he did, Daddy gave her a passing glance. "Don't say anything. Let me do the talking." "Okay, Daddy." She was very frightened. Daddy got in the car, and she slid in beside him. A tall, muscular man sat behind the wheel. Daddy drew his gun from under his coat. "Go!" The man nodded and pulled out onto the road. "Now, I'm going to give you a destination, and you are going to take my daughter and I there without a word. I have no desire to harm you, but I will kill you if I have to." The man nodded again without a word. Charlie watched the exchange fearfully, still not believing what her father was doing. How can he be like this? Daddy must have sensed her upset, for he placed a hand on her back and began to gently massage her muscles. "Everything's fine, Karen. Don't be afraid. We're safe now." Warmth trickled through her flesh where her father had touched her, but her blood and heart remained as ice. She knew he was lying through his teeth. In truth, he was as tense as she was frightened. Charlie looked at her father and was terrified. His face was white as a sheet, and he was sweating heavily. There were tinges of blue around his mouth, and his eyes were bloodshot. The hand that was stroking her back was trembling. He would not be able to travel much further. She was tired and didn't think she could go much further either. They had to find some place to hide. The government men are still out there. They had to get away fast. She glanced at the man behind the wheel. His face looked kindly, but she knew better. He was very dangerous. He was afraid, but for him, fear provoked action. He would take advantage of any opportunity he was given. "He's a policeman." She felt this with absolute certainty. The policeman was already talking to Daddy in a friendly tone, trying to gain his confidence. "Your little girl is very beautiful. What's her name?" "Never mind her. Keep your eyes on the road." The policeman smiled at her kindly. "Hi, honey. What's your name?" Daddy jammed the gun into his ribs. "Do not talk to her." "Okay." The policeman's voice was steady. "Listen, you don't want to do this. I'm a cop. Whatever trouble you're in, we can work it out." "No, we cannot. I have no wish to do this to you, but I have no choice. I have to protect my daughter." "You're doing a great job of that. You're taking good care of your daughter, but you're not helping her by putting her in danger." The policeman looked into Daddy's eyes. "Please, give me the gun. Nobody will hurt your little girl. I give you my word." "Sorry." Daddy withdrew the gun from the policeman's ribs. "You cannot protect us from them. This is the only way." Charlie's fear grew stronger, for this was not like her father. He was usually very controlled, always taking care not to reveal information about them. Even when he was sick, he had never before told anything. "Who's after you?" Daddy was silent. "I promise, whoever's after you won't hurt your little girl or you. They won't get near you. Just tell me what's going on." "Never mind," Daddy answered. "Just keep driving." "All right." The policeman's voice still held that friendly quality. "But I want you to know I'm on your side. Whatever situation you're in, I can help you if you just let me." Daddy stared at him with what would have been a threatening glare were it not for his tired, bloodshot eyes. After that, the policeman was silent. That night was an agony of fear and suspicion. Charlie was exhausted, but she would not allow herself to sleep. She had to stay awake, because she did not believe her father was capable of handling the policeman alone. She was terrified of what might happen if she were to fall asleep. Charlie remembered little of the actual car ride. All she remembered was the fear, cold, heart-chilling. "I have to stay awake. Have to stay awake or we'll be caught." She repeated the words over and over to herself. In the end, her efforts were in vain. As the sky was changing from black to purple, she felt herself drifting off. She struggled against it, but her body was too exhausted. Darkness swallowed her, carrying her away to a place where even fear could not touch her. Charlie awoke suddenly, soaked in sweat and sobbing miserably. Everything had seemed so real, the feelings, the images. It was as if she had stepped back in time to that night, to when her father was still alive. And now it was gone. Her father was gone, dead, and she was alone again. Charlie cried for several minutes before sitting up and sliding to the edge of the bed. She wasn't thirsty, but maybe a glass of water would help her feel better. Suddenly, her muscles drew tight and she collapsed to the floor. The attack was so sudden and severe that she didn't even have a chance to scream. White-hot pain ripped through her body in waves. Her muscles drew very tight, to the point where she felt certain she would tear in half. The muscle spasms grew in intensity with each passing moment. Charlie wanted to scream, but she could not. Her vocal cords were paralyzed. The pain continued to grow, burning through her like molten metal, searing her to the core. "Please make it stop. It hurts." She wanted to scream the words, but her paralyzed throat muscles would not allow her. "Please, no more." Her muscles drew tighter still, causing her to arch off the ground. The pain was excruciating, almost insupportable. She was going to pull apart. There was no question. A moment later, her muscles relaxed for a second. Then they drew tighter still, plunging Charlie into excruciating pain. She imagined she knew how it must feel to be put in the electric chair. She felt as if she were being electrocuted, or burned alive. Her flesh felt as if it were being seared off. She began to honestly believe she was on fire. The pain was almost beyond feeling. Her senses grew dull, blunted beneath a growing red haze of suffering. She was one with the pain, and it was all that mattered. Though she remained conscious throughout the attack, her awareness of her surroundings faded until it became almost peripheral. Charlie was vaguely aware of David screaming to Catherine to get help, and sometime later remembered being lifted onto a stretcher and pushed into an ambulance. Later, she was strapped to a bed in a white-tiled room, surrounded by white-masked faces. The air in this room was hot and close, and stunk of smoke. Flames were shooting from a trash can in one corner. The white-masked faces ran around frantically as the air filled with their frightened shouts. One of them grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed it at the blazing trash can. Everything after that was a red blur of searing pain. When the attack finally passed, Charlie found herself lying in a hospital bed surrounded by machines. There was a needle in the back of her hand and a tube in her nose. She was naked, except for a flimsy hospital gown and the blanket that covered her. Little suction cups had been pasted to her chest. These were connected by thin wires to a machine to the left of the bed. David and Catherine stood over her with worried expressions. "Charlie, can you hear me, Charlie?" David's voice was very concerned. "David," her voice a little more than a whisper. Charlie felt like crying. She was embarrassed to have them see her like this. "Thank God." Catherine was was close to tears. Her eyes glistened in the room's low light. David and Catherine both took her into their arms. Charlie hugged them tightly. "It's okay. I'm fine now." It was a poor lie. She didn't feel fine. She was exhausted. Her body felt heavy, as if it were made of lead, and she was still in pain. She did not have much time left. Charlie glanced out the window and saw that it was dark out. "I must have been asleep for hours." "Actually, it's Sunday. You were unconscious for almost 3 days." David forced a smile. "But don't worry. You're going to be fine now." Charlie felt like crying again. He was trying so hard not to upset her, but she already knew the truth. She was dying. She would probably be dead in a few days. "I know," she replied softly. Just then another question occurred to her. "Where are we?" "You're in the hospital." David's voice was troubled. Cold fear raced through her blood. "We have to get away. We'll be caught." David took her hand. "Shh. It's okay. We're all right for now. But, shh." David stroked her hand. "Relax. Sleep. You'll feel better." Charlie glanced at Catherine. She looked frightened, but nodded her agreement with David. "Everything's going to be all right, Charlie." Her voice held no conviction. Charlie was not comforted, but she kept her feelings to herself. This is all my fault. The NSA is going to catch us here and kill us all. Guilt welled up in her heart. Again, she felt like crying, but she continued to hold back the tears. Not in front of David and Catherine. After a time, Charlie fell asleep. She was awakened by the doctor. Hi, Sue Ann. I'm Dr. Hale. Your mommy and daddy told me that you were feeling better. I'm glad to hear that. Charlie offered him a slight smile. Hi. Dr. Hale offered her a friendly smile in return. I'd like to examine you. It won't take long, and then you can go back to sleep. Is that okay, Sue Ann? She nodded shyly. Charlie didn't sense any menace in this man, but she was still distrustful. Dr. Hale's smile widened. Thank you, Sue Ann. The examination only took 10 minutes. Afterward, Dr. Hale spoke to her briefly. How do you feel, Sue Ann? I'm tired, Charlie replied, and my body hurts. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. He glanced down and wrote something on his clipboard. Is it a sharp pain or a dull ache? It burns, Charlie replied, and it's sharp, like somebody's stabbing me. He nodded and wrote on his clipboard. Other than the pain, do you feel all right? Do you feel sick to your stomach or anything? Charlie shook her head. No? Okay. He scribbled some final notes on his clipboard, and then offered her a friendly smile. You had yourself quite an episode there, Sue Ann. You were unconscious for a long time. No, I wasn't, Charlie replied steadily. I had a seizure, then I fainted. Dr. Hale's smile disappeared momentarily. Who told you that? I remember, Charlie answered softly. Dr. Hale's smile was gone now. That's not possible. A moment later his smile returned. You must have been dreaming. Charlie knew that her memories were genuine and not dreams, and she sensed that Dr. Hale knew this as well. Don't worry, Sue Ann. You're going to be fine now. You'll be out of here in a couple of days. Dr. Hale's voice was much more confident than he was. He left with a smile on his face. Charlie strongly felt his fear. It added to her own, bringing tears to her eyes. Charlie blinked them back fiercely. David and Catherine were asleep on cots next to her bed. She did not want to disturb them, so she simply laid awake, shivering and fighting back the tears. Sometime shortly before dawn, Charlie finally fell asleep. She slept for 11 hours before finally awakening. Over the next week, Charlie's condition deteriorated rapidly. By the next Thursday, she was no longer able to stand up. By Friday, she had no control over her bowels or bladder. Friday night, she had her most severe attack yet and went into a coma for several hours. When she regained consciousness, Charlie was too weak to lift her head. She cried for several hours that night before she was able to regain control of herself. It wasn't fair. She had been able to walk when she came into the hospital. Now she couldn't even lift her arms. The pain had quadrupled over the week, and so had the severity of her seizures. I'm going to die, she sobbed miserably. I'm going to die. David held her tightly in his arms, and as he stroked her sweat-soaked hair and tried to comfort her. You're not going to die, Charlie. You're going to be fine. You'll feel better soon. Charlie knew he was lying, and that made her cry even harder. David tried so hard. He was always so kind to her. She didn't deserve such kindness. Not long after she finally stopped crying, Charlie fell asleep, still cradled in David's arms. When she awoke the next morning, he was still holding her. His eyes were closed and his breathing was even. He must have gone to sleep holding me. She was so touched that she nearly burst into tears. She wasn't his child. They weren't even related. He had found her hiding under a bush and taken her into his home. He had cared for her and loved her as if she were his daughter. He and Catherine had both given up everything for her. It hurt her to think of how much they had sacrificed. Big, round tears welled up in her eyes and trickled down her cheeks. She cried, not for herself, but for David and Catherine. In that moment, she wished she had been killed with her father. Everyone would have been happier that way. 20 minutes after Charlie had awakened, David stirred and opened his eyes. Charlie gulped back hot tears gulped back her tears, not wanting to upset her. "Good morning, Charlie." David's voice was still thick with sleep. "Good morning, David. How do you feel?" Tired, she replied in an upbeat tone as she could muster. David smiled gently. "How about some breakfast?" "Oh no, I'll get sick." Charlie had been unable to keep solid foods down since last Tuesday. "You should try to eat something. How are you going to get better if you don't eat?" "But I'll just throw it up," Charlie replied miserably. "Maybe you won't this time." Despite the confidence in his voice, Charlie knew David didn't believe his own words. "Besides, you don't want another shot, do you?" She shook her head weakly. Suddenly the room had become cold. Her skin turned to goose flesh, and she began to tremble. Since Wednesday, all of her meals had been injected into the large vein in her neck. The procedure was very painful, and it took several hours. As she thought about it, she suddenly became aware of the large catheter jutting out of her jugular vein. It burned and throbbed agonizingly. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please don't let them do that again. Please, David, it hurts." He stroked her cheek. "I know, Charlie. I know. But if you don't eat, they're going to have to. You can't go without food." As he spoke, Catherine stirred in her chair and awakened. "What time is it?" David glanced up at the clock on the wall. 10:30. She groaned. "I need some coffee." She stood up laboriously and walked to the bed. "Hi, Charlie. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Charlie replied morosely. Catherine stroked her cheek. "It'll be all right. I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to go get some coffee." "Would you like a glass of orange juice or a soda or something?" "No, that's okay." In truth, she would have loved a glass of juice or milk or even water. Her throat was parched. However, she knew she would just throw up whatever she drank. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. You can have something if you want. Anything at all." Catherine's voice was so gentle it hurt. "No, I can't." She had meant to add something about not being able to eat or drink without vomiting, but before she could, Charlie dissolved into tears. She wept bitterly, mourning the total unfairness of it all. "Mommy and Daddy are dead. David and Catherine are in trouble because of me. And I'm going to die." Suddenly her body went rigid, as every muscle drew taut at once. A strangled cry escaped her throat before her voice box was paralyzed. "No, please, not again." Her mind screamed the words without her mouth. Her mouth could not speak. "Please, I can't take any more pain." In response, her muscles drew tighter, twisting and contorting them against themselves. White flame swept her body. A scream was building within. She wanted so badly to scream, to beg for help. "Let me die," she thought desperately. "Please let me die. Anything to make it stop." There was no answer, and the pain continued to grow. Every inch of her body blazed hotly. For a moment, she wondered if she had not lost control of the power again and set herself on fire. But she saw no flames. Suddenly, her back jerked into painful spasm, catapulting her off the bed. She landed on her side, drawn into a fetal position by her own convulsed muscles. She was unable to control any part of her body. To her immense embarrassment, Charlie soiled and wet the bed. A moment later, another back spasm rolled her over into her own urine and feces. "Stop, please." Charlie's mind fragmented from the pain, making clear thought difficult. Even her vision and hearing were obscured. Catherine was screaming for a doctor while David tried to hold Charlie steady. His efforts were a waste as Charlie threw him off within minutes, while in the grip of another powerful muscle spasm. The muscles in her chest were tightening, as were the muscles in her throat. Breathing became increasingly difficult. Charlie choked and sputtered, struggling to get breath into her screaming lungs. Terror swept through her. "No, please. I don't want to die, please. I'm just a kid. I'm only 9. There was no answer. Her chest and throat continued to constrict. She began to wheeze. Her lungs felt as if they would burst. The pain was almost beyond feeling. Almost. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she fought desperately to breathe. Suddenly, the pain didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was getting air into her lungs. She struggled valiantly to breathe, but her strength was waning. Black spots began to fill her field of vision. Then all at once, her chest and throat muscles went slack. Charlie drew in a deep, shaky breath and let it whistle out between her teeth. A dozen frightened faces floated above her. Charlie recognized David, Catherine, and Dr. Hale, but the others were strangers. Dr. Hale spoke first. "Charlie, can you hear me?" He had used her real name, but that didn't matter anymore. "Yes." Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "Are you all right?" David's voice was frightened. "Do you feel any pain?" Dr. Hale's voice was steady despite the fear she sensed in him. "Yes." "Where?" "Everywhere," she replied with a sob. "Shh," David soothed. "Don't cry, Charlie. Everything's going to be all right." Charlie bit back her tears. "Just relax, and the pain will pass." Charlie closed her eyes and tried to bring her emotion under control. It took several minutes, but she was eventually able to calm down. She would die soon. Since awakening that morning, deep inside, she had known that she would die today, but she had not been able to consciously accept it until now. The realization struck her like lightning from above. She was going to die today, probably within the next few hours. Her body was too ravaged to survive another seizure. The next attack would certainly kill her. Now was the time to say her goodbyes. Charlie looked up at David and Catherine with tear-stained eyes. "I'm sorry I put you through all this." "It's not your fault, Charlie." David's voice was husky. "You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." He hugged her tightly to his chest. "You've been an angel through all of this." He was crying, though he was doing his best to hide it. Charlie felt bad for him. "Everything's going to be all right now, Charlie. You'll never be in pain again. You'll be with your father and mother in heaven." David was smiling through his tears. "It's okay to let go, Charlie. When the time comes, don't fight it. Just let go. You don't have to go through any more suffering for us." Catherine nodded. She was crying too hard to speak, but Charlie sensed that her fears were the same as David's. "We love you, Charlie. We'll always love you." Charlie hugged David as tightly as she could, despite the pain it caused her. "I love you too. Thank you for taking care of me." As she spoke those last words, Charlie felt her muscles grow tight. Within seconds, her body was alight again with pain. White flames swept her head to toe, penetrating her to the core. Again, her chest and throat contracted, this time closing her airway entirely. David's words echoed in her mind. "Let go, Charlie. You don't have to fight anymore. Just let go." She couldn't, though. Her heart insisted that she fight for survival. Her lungs had swollen to the bursting point. Dr. Hale was standing over her, shouting, "Breathe, damn it! Damn it, Charlie, you have to breathe." "I can't. My throat's closed. My chest is crushed." "Charlie, listen to me. You have to breathe, or I'm going to have to cut your throat open, and it'll hurt." "No, please don't do that. Please don't do that." Charlie redoubled her efforts to breathe, but her struggle was in vain. All she succeeded